Gimmicks are an essential part of Kamen Rider. They go in the belt and make our heroes what they are. Every gimmick from Advent cards to Gachizo has been pretty special. Unfortunately, it's typical we see a lot of fall off with gimmicks, especially later in the shows. Build going straight for Rabbit Rabbit instead of Gorillamon. Geet shooting for Mark 9 for a single Yamato instead of, I don't know, literally anything else. And like Ghost turning straight to Mugen instant. Wait. Hold on, that's Grateful. The Icon Driver G is a belt that contains the power of all 15 of the Luminary icons collected by Tenkouchi Takaru over the course of the first 2 arcs of the show, and gives him access to Grateful, a super form which exists as a fusion of all of the symbols for the suits. But Kelly, I hear you saying, usually fusion forms also forget about their gimmick. Well, thankfully Grateful is a little bit different. Unlike Rabbit Rabbit that uses, Rabbit, Grateful uses all of the icons we've seen so far from Musashi to Sanzo. Now, Ghost hate is pretty frequent, and sometimes even understandable, but one thing that I hope people who even dislike the show recognize is Ghost has the best gimmick utilization in any Kamen Rider show. First of all, Grateful does more than just summon previous form weapons or project entire forms. Unlike Genius, which, though it technically includes all the full bottles, Grateful is active in the use of its parts. It does this by summoning the Damashi. Takaru's relationship with the Damashi gives an incredible amount of depth to the summons and, by extension, Grateful itself. Takaru's forms are all based on the prominent historical features of luminaries that are found on the icons. Edison featured electricity and light bulbs. Himiko featured clasped pans and fortune orbs. It's actually really nice. However, all of these forms are headed by an episode or two dedicated to Takaru earning respect from the luminary. Maybe by completing a task offered by the Ghost or simply helping someone that they're directly affecting. Takaru has to go on at least a small episodes-long journey to kind of gain the respect of this soul he's trying to work with. But because the show places so much emphasis on the strengthening of the bond between the Damashi, Takaru, and the form itself, it makes summoning them, especially because it shows the Damashi and not like Ghost Himiko Damashi, it's specifically just the Himiko Damashi by itself, it lends so much more to the feeling of them showing up to help Takaru. It feels more unique and real, a bit closer to something like Gotchard summoning combinations of old Chemis, but he's summoning the Chemis themselves, which is where the bond is. Even though they are more than happy to become Gotchard forms to help Hotaro, Ghost is different. He summons them as elementally and purely as they can, and then they choose to help him. Despite how hearty and felt these connections are, there are a couple of flaws, like specifically Grimm's episode coming after the introduction of the Mugen icon. However, even though Takaru has been granted a power like Mugen, he still fights for the respect of the Grimm brothers and every other icon whose focus episode happened to be after Mugen's debut. He takes the time to fight for the respect of these souls that he's so proudly, literally wearing into battle, and I think it's really nice, and it makes something like Grateful feel more meaningful, because they aren't just a means to an end, they're entities that he cares about, knowing that a lack of trust or understanding between them would lead to an inability to properly use these powers. The icons to Takaru aren't something like the Dragon Balls or MacGuffins like I would have expected. They're characters, and while admittedly they aren't fleshed out as someone like Makoto or Elaine, they're given plenty of depth and spotlight. We learn that Ryoma believes in seeing things through and realizing your true potential. We learn Edison's work isn't all eureka and brilliance, it's trial and error, and that's awesome. And all of this is only talking about the situations where the Damashi directly interacts with Takaru. These souls are really brought to life with the Toku alumni brought on to be the host for these luminaries, featuring at one point Yellowbuster and even a post-wizard Koyomi. All of these things culminate in memorable episodes and, most importantly, a strong bond with Takaru. On top of looking amazing, the Grateful Suit stands for something that's commonly lost in super gimmicky shows, and that's the connection between the gimmick and the hero. There's a couple of episodes later in the show where Takaru goes straight to Mugen. Unfortunately it's common, but hey, we've got toys to sell. It comes with the territory. But when trying to commune with icons, Takaru finds difficult, and it's because they've gotten this weird kind of jealous. Their bonds are withering. So despite being against Mr. fucking Heisei who's on his get back, Takaru is dead set on using Grateful because it represents the bonds he's made with the luminaries and that they are more than weapons. They are his friends. Takaru spends the bulk of 1 or 2 episodes rekindling his bond, which all culminates in Takaru assuring everyone he hasn't forgotten them, and all the luminaries assuring Takaru that even if he moves on, they're all still standing behind him. With everyone's feelings reassured and everyone finally on the same page again, this small arc is ended with a beautiful fight that unfortunately comes to a close with Seiji Takaiwa getting his butt handed to him, Takaru calling on all his friends for a journey through the show and finishing with a grand, grateful finish from Takaru himself. It plays out similarly to the revised fight where he's well known, where Ikki goes through every genome before using Barret Rex, except instead of it being a showcase or a final run, it's Takaru almost saying goodbye, almost moving on from the Icon's power, but in a way with them being understanding. They know that Mugen is the key to defeating the Ganma properly, the Ganmaiser specifically. And so they go through this one last battle with him, and even though they're still all with him in the form of weapons and powers used in Mugen, they're moving on from being the main jacket in the situation. I think it's really nice. I think it's really well done to have a proper send-off in this way, because while in other shows a run through all the forms feels great, I can admit that it usually feels like a toy commercial, like the revised one I mentioned. Even though it is great, don't get me wrong. But specifically the way icons are handled in Ghost makes this final fight with all of the icons feel like more of see you later, more of shaking hands with old friends and moving on to new things. And that's really nice. Ghost isn't everyone's favorite. A lot of people think it's very bad, but I think it's beautiful and a really special show. If only because its gimmicks are more than just that. And even if they're still only there to sell toys, I'm glad they did it in such an awesome way.